And at the same time, you get this reversion back to bloody politics. The Roman Republic begins to break down, and if you want to get into the office, you got to kill someone to get in. That's the sort of reversion back to the early tribal barbarism that the culture began in. And once that starts to happen, you know that's coming to an end too. And indeed, if it turns out that the government did assassinate JFK, that will be the beginnings of the enunciation of our slow reversion into these brutal politics of force, whereby the representative idea just simply breaks down. In the Roman case, the Roman civilization had begun with a sequence of 7 kings, and they got rid of the idea of kingship because they couldn't stand this idea of a monarchy. So they got rid of the kings and put in 2 sort of primary leaders who would check each other. So they developed a whole system of checks and balances. And we, as Americans, modeled our system of government on that check and balance system of the Romans. But the problem with that system is that the checks and balances over time begin to interfere with each other, such that you get a gradual gridlock that forms, and nobody can decide on anything. And the only way to bust that open is with bringing in force, violence. This is what happened in the Roman civilization, and it's definitely what's happening in our American culture. There's no doubt about it. We're reverting to this slowly. It takes a while. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a centuries-long process, but it's definitely occurring. But along with this reversion to barbarism, what you also get that comes full circle is the second religiousness. Just as the culture began in this deep piety, so too the intellect begins to exterminate itself. The culture renounces by ceasing to manifest itself in great geniuses. You get fewer and fewer and fewer of them, and the individual renounces by laying aside books. People stop reading. I mean, you get the Neil Postmans and the McLuhans who cry and whine about electronic culture as signifying, you know, getting rid of books, but that isn't the case from Spengler's point of view. That's simply the manifestation in our culture of what happened in the Roman civilization when people started burning books. They stopped reading. The Romans expelled philosophers left and right. They had huge book burnings. And as soon as you get autocratic authority coming in and can determine who can read what, I mean, the civilization is just no longer interested in thought and begins to shift over into belief, into spirituality. And so the Romans, in the time of Caesar, when the Republic was disintegrating, and if anybody's seen I, Claudius, you've got this in your mind, then they begin reverting to, you know, oracles, and they start thinking about astrology, and you get all this sudden proliferation of mystery cults all over the place, of which Christianity was merely one, and they're all competing. And Spengler says this is what we've got in store for us over the next century, between 2100 and 2200. He says, I can make predictions in this book that will be more accurate than any historian has ever made before based on this model. And so far, the predictions that he's made for the 20th century have been dead on. And the predictions that he's made for 2100 to 2200 are the reversion to Caesarism, the disintegration of Republican electoral politics, the rise of force politics, and this gradual fascination with the occult and a return of deep, profound spirituality as this whole thing begins to sink back into Mother Earth. And then as far as Spengler is concerned, our technology is something that came out of the soul of our culture, and as we die, our technological systems will gradually die along with us. So this is not a permanent thing here, any more than the little Greek machines were to them. He says, our civilization will lie in ruins one day, just as the Roman roads lie in ruins, and the gigantic aqueducts that they had lie in ruins. So too, this is what we have to look forward to, as a gradual extermination of populations and this sort of gigantic series of ruins. It's centuries down the line, that point. But he says that's where we're headed. So with Spengler, we get this wonderful pessimism about where we're headed.
But that's not.
It's kind of, yeah, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, one of the reasons people don't read Spengler is because it's so gloomy. But the other reason is because it's so difficult to read, because he talks about everything simultaneously, and the paragraphs are so dense, as they are in Steiner. It's really difficult to move through it, except by being very persistent about it. And he's a generalist, and the academics immediately attacked him when his book came out, saying, well, at this point about Egyptian pottery fragments, you didn't get this right. And you know, the academics are always specialized, and they can't see the forest for the trees. You know, they're specializing on trees. But Spengler had this vision, and I think it's correct as far as it goes. But with Gebser tomorrow, it'll be interesting because we'll see how Gebser it comes, the generation after Spengler reads Spengler and says, I've got a better idea, and one that's more optimistic and an idea that beats Spengler. But I think what we've got here is a sort of, what we're going to end up is a sort of combination of Spenglerian pessimism and Gebserian optimism. But we'll see. Gebser kind of goes back to the theory of the evolution of consciousness and shows these gradual structures of consciousness and how they change, and how what Spengler identified as the emergence of this slow second religiousness and the disintegration of culture forms in the 19th century, Gebser identifies simply as a restructuring process for the birth of a new mutation of consciousness, which is in the process of going on right now. And we'll see that what Gebser means actually maps on to about what Steiner meant by the descent of the Archangel Michael, the birth of the Michaelic age, and what Spengler meant by the coming second religiousness, I think, was also the same thing Steiner more or less was articulating by this idea of the coming Michaelic age, when we would recover spirituality. So I think these men, we'll find, are all in agreement with respect to the idea that something new is transforming itself through this wreckage that we're going through. And that brings us to about where, as far as I wanted to go today. So.